It's like when Gavaskar has come back to the pavilion and you're the next guy going out. You know, what chance?
To younger commentators, if we get a final like that again in my lifetime, then I'll be quite...
Hello guys, welcome to Off the Pitch, presented to you by the Sports Doyen. My name is Anurag. We started off this series with the one and only Clive Tillisley. It was very important on our part to maintain that standard, to maintain that bar very high. And in that pursuit, we could not have asked for a better guest than Derek Rae, one of the biggest name in Scottish broadcasting history, in British broadcasting history, to be honest. Hello, Derek. Thank you so much for joining. It really means a lot to us.
My pleasure, Anurag. Thank you for the invitation, and I will do my best to keep the standard high.
Thank you so much. I know you will. I definitely know you will. So you are currently in Massachusetts, if I'm not wrong. And how has it been in and around your area?
Yes, I live here in the Boston area, just about 25 minutes north of the city of Boston itself. And we had it fairly hard here, I think it's fair to say. Obviously, we're not that far from New York. So I think the New York story is one that was covered quite extensively around the world. Maybe the Boston story less so, but we more or less fell a couple of weeks behind New York. And what happened in New York, maybe to a slightly smaller extent, but did happen here in Massachusetts. And I think people are still quite scarred by the whole experience. I can tell you for my part that I have been working from home now since March, and I haven't done any traveling, and I don't expect to be doing any traveling for the foreseeable future, which is the disappointing aspect for somebody whose job to a large extent is about traveling and commentating. But we get on with it, and we try to find positives in other ways. And for me, that means enjoying the summer here, enjoying nature, enjoying some of the things that maybe in our busy lives we don't always find time to focus on. So that more or less sums it up.
Yeah, so I understand that, because even for us over here, so we are actually students who are based in Mumbai. We are from different parts of India, but we were based in Mumbai, but we had to rush back to our homes because of all of this. So it has been tough for everyone across the globe, but eventually a lot of us have to be thankful that we have a roof over our shoulders, and there are plenty of people struggling in. So drifting past that conversation, your career started with Aberdeen, if I'm not wrong, during the golden phase of Aberdeen, when a certain Sir Alex Ferguson was in charge of the club. We love the man equally as well. A lot of people who've joined the call right now, we're all Manchester United fans, so obviously we do love the man. And those were exciting years to be starting a career off, isn't it?
Oh, undoubtedly. I count my blessings regularly that I'm from Aberdeen and I got to live that era as an aspiring commentator. And in those days, if you go back to the late 70s and the early 80s, that was the Ferguson era at Aberdeen. I was really at that point trying to perfect my craft. I certainly didn't come close to perfecting my craft at the age of 12 or 13, but I was taking my tape recorder to games, reserve games, and also first team games. And when I worked for hospital radio in Aberdeen, and I did that from the age of around 15, 16 on, I obviously was covering the team that was going to, in 1983, win the Cup Winners' Cup, one of the European trophies at the time, along with the European Cup and the UEFA Cup. And Aberdeen did that under Ferguson by beating Bayern in the quarterfinal and Real Madrid in the final. It's unbelievable for younger people nowadays to sort of take that in, because you think about preconceived notions about big clubs in Europe and smaller clubs. But that was the hierarchy back in 1983. And you mentioned Alex Ferguson. We have a lot to be grateful to Alex Ferguson for, because he brought a winning mentality to Aberdeen. He was ubiquitous in Aberdeen. He was everywhere. He seemed to manage to cover every inch of Aberdeen in one way or another, whether it was just being out there sort of spreading the gospel about the team, or obviously using his skills to make the team better, to put the football club on the map. And yeah, I think back so fondly. And in fact, I did for the club, for Aberdeen. We recently did a retrospective during the pandemic, looking back at 1983, a little Zoom call similar to what we're doing right now, but with 4 of the heroes of that team just getting their memories and actually building up to the game and then showing the game on the club television channel and then reflecting on it afterwards. So, yeah, special times, certainly.
Yeah, indeed, sir. So, I mean, those must have been, and later on, you also commentated on the Scotland-England game, which sort of got you the recognition, uh, which built a great path for your future.
Yes, well, England against Scotland, Scotland against England, whether at Wembley or at Hampden. In those days, when I was younger, that was the big fixture. That was the one that we built up to every year, and we just couldn't wait to watch on TV. Now, I'd never been to one of them because I, as we said, came from Aberdeen, 3 hours from Glasgow. I'd never been to Wembley. But my second game on air as a professional in 1986, I was 19, was England against Scotland at Wembley. And how does that happen? You sort of ask yourself. I ask myself that to this day. I got a lucky break, and it just so happened that BBC Radio Scotland had been monitoring my work, and they'd wanted to give me an opportunity. And lo and behold, the commentator who was my great hero, a guy called David Francie, the late, great David Francie, was unavailable for that game. He had a knee injury. He was getting ready for a few other big assignments coming up, and they wanted to make sure that he could do those assignments. And so they gave me a chance at a game in Kilmarnock the weekend before. Little did I know at the time, it was sort of an audition for England against Scotland. If I got through that Kilmarnock-Dumbarton game, then they were going to give me England-Scotland. I didn't know any of that until after I got through the first test. So my second game on air as a professional was England against Scotland. And Scotland didn't win, sadly, but I'll still always think back fondly to that night at Wembley in April 1986.
My goodness. So also a little bit of information to our viewers. In 1987, Derek Rae was named the British Broadcaster of the Year. So it definitely must have been a great start. So, very recently, in recent years, you've gotten into the e-gaming area as well, FIFA. So a little bit of an anecdote here. So a few days back, I said to a few of my friends that I'll be interviewing Derek Rae. So they don't watch football, so they didn't recognize you much, but they are avid FIFA game fans. And the moment I sort of did a small impersonation of you, and when you introduced Lee Dixon and yourself, I'll not do that. That was very horrible. But once I did that,
I want to hear it.
no, please. That was really bad. So once I did that, they really got excited and they actually wanted to join the call, but for strictly professional reasons, we couldn't do that. But I mean, that is what the game does to the footballing world, or to even to those who don't watch the game. And how has that experience been? Because you don't have the energy to feed off. It's sort of, you have to do everything inside a closed room, and you have to work on prompts basically. So how was that experience for you?
It's a brilliant experience. I absolutely love it. And to be honest, I still feel very honored that EA Sports invited me to be one of the commentators on FIFA a few years ago, because they could have gone to any commentator in the world. And it turns out that they were very familiar with my work on the Champions League, and they were moving towards getting the Champions League as part of the FIFA game that year, FIFA 19 it was. And so when I go into the studio to do FIFA, I have a big smile on my face, and all my colleagues will confirm that, because I view it as a great creative challenge, because you go in not really knowing what the day is going to bring. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the challenging part of it, we all love challenges. The challenging part of it is to put yourself in the actual scene of the game, because when I'm commentating, I'm not physically commentating on somebody's game. I'm commentating on scenarios and trying to bring them to life, so that when somebody plays the game, it all sounds authentic and organic. And I have to really pay tribute to the people behind the scenes at EA Sports, because on the technical side, on the production side, on the audio side, they do such a wonderful job of making it all seem realistic, of making the different things join up. And that is the beauty of it. You know, I don't necessarily know at the time what is going to join up with what. I have to have a vague idea, And that's where inflection comes into it, and making sure that I put the right inflection on a particular phrase. But the whole thing is just a fascinating experience. And yeah, it's become a huge part of my life. And there's no doubt that there are people now who perhaps don't know my work at all, through all the years that I've been doing it, or didn't know my work at all, but now associate me with the iconic FIFA game. So when somebody says that, I always sort of stop to think and, just put into my head what it means to people around the world, this hugely popular video game that I'm now part of.
Indeed. So, talking about commentating with challenges. So I don't think in the history of football, at least of what I've followed, very few scenarios have occurred like the current one, the COVID-19 one, and now there are no crowds. You still have to go to the stadium. You said you are working from home, so there is obviously, again, there is no energy from the crowd to feed off. There is no, the real atmosphere is really missing. And a lot of commentators that I've heard from, I'm a huge lover of this art, so I listen to a lot of commentators speak about their craft. So most of them, one thing that I hear in common is that they love feeding off the energy. They love the crowd reactions. They're just going berserk after a goal is scored and stuff like that. So there is nothing of sorts now. So it's basically 22 people on the pitch, one referee, the few on the sidelines, and the touchline incidents that happen. So how difficult has it been to commentate in this current scenario?
Well, first of all, I should say that I haven't actually commentated on a game during the pandemic because of my location, because I live here in Massachusetts. I can't travel. And the idea of working remotely, okay, in theory, it's possible, but the broadcasters I work for, up to this point anyway, haven't opted to do anything in terms of commentators being at home. So I can tell you, though, a lot about broadcasting without fans inside the stadium, because that I have done down the years, mostly, of course, when you have incidents at games and teams are forced to play behind closed doors, to use the phrase that we used to use a lot, not so much now in the pandemic, because everything is behind closed doors. What I can say is that it is difficult for a commentator because you do rely very heavily on the energy of the crowd, and especially on TV. I always try to use the crowd, if you like, as my extra instrument, so that once you commentate for a while, you get to understand the rhythm of a crowd, and you sort of know where the ooh and the ah is going to come. And I think a lot of good commentators who you'll hear around the world will use this technique, so that there's no real point in trying to talk over that. You sort of use that to your advantage. And the same with a goal. Sometimes it's pointless to fill a goal commentary with too much verbiage. And I think we all make that mistake from time to time. But very often there's nothing more effective than letting the crowd speak for itself. Now, in the absence of a crowd, we don't have that instrument. So that's why I think it is a period of adaptation for most of us in the commentary business. And while I'm greatly missing commentating on live matches, people who play FIFA won't really believe that I'm not commentating on live matches at the moment. I've heard that from a few people. They've said, "Oh no, you're on my Xbox every day of the week," But obviously, I'm not doing that organically for that particular game at the time. So it is a period of adaptation, I think, for everybody in the commentary business, because you go from using the crowd in this way to not having the crowd at all. And I think we all probably, to an extent, have to slightly tweak our commentary style to make room for the fact that we don't have the crowd.
Indeed. So there's another thing, like, I haven't heard a lot of commentators talk about this, especially a commentator's health. That is what I actually wanted to talk about, because there is no way a commentator can say, I have a cough, I have a cold, because that is basically your work to do. And how do you actually, is there anything specific that you do to take care of it?
There's nothing specific. What I will say is I've had to call off games down the years, just like, most people in their jobs have to call off a game. You hope it doesn't happen too often. You work very hard at protecting your voice. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you have a cold or a virus, sometimes you are not well equipped to do the job, just like a footballer sometimes is not equipped to do his job. And you have to take that into account. I will say that, and I'm sure that I'm not the only commentator who would tell you this, I'm a little bit paranoid when it comes to things like viruses and colds. And obviously I travel a lot, so I'm probably exposed to a lot of things. And it's the one thing I dread. If I feel a cold coming on, and you hope it doesn't happen too often, but obviously we all get colds, then the first thing I do is really try to protect myself and really try to say, okay, I've got 5 days until I have this game to do. Absolutely do not ruin your voice in those 5 days. And there have been times when I have, done a game when I've been feeling slightly under the weather, and you pay a price for it sometimes for several days after that. So I think we're all different. There are some lucky people out there who never seem to get ill, never seem to get colds, never seem to be affected by any of it. I'm not in that category, sadly. So it's just something that that you always think about, and you think permanently about. Like you'll see here, I've got this water bottle right beside the computer. I probably drink more bottles of water a day than most people, because you're always thinking about not losing your voice and always having your voice when you need it. But yeah, I can only speak for myself. But hopefully we always are able to speak for ourselves and not lose our voices. But there are times when it is unavoidable.
Yeah, indeed. Over the years, in my growing, as I was growing up, in my football watching experience, the commentators that I followed a lot, of course, yourself. There was John Champion. There was a bit of not a lot of Martin Tyler, but sometimes yes, we did get to hear him. There was a bit of Clive Tildesley. There was a bit of obviously Peter Drury, and all of these people. One thing that I noticed, one thing that I find different in you is I've heard somewhere that your preparation notes are very small when compared to the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Like you sort of try to fill everything up inside one sheet of paper. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. And I think the one thing, and you've
how
named
how does that happen?
well, I think, you've named there some of the greats in commentary, and you mentioned John Champion. John lives about half an hour from me here in the States nowadays, and he actually popped up to the house. We had a socially distanced chat, first time I'd seen him for a long time. Just last week, I live quite near the beach. We took a little walk down to the beach and just caught up. But it's a small world when it comes to commentators like that. We sort of all know each other and go back quite a long way. And as I said, you've named some of the very best in the business. Ian Darke is another who I put on that list, who's an old friend of mine, and I think certainly belongs on that list. But the one thing that we all have in common is that we don't prepare in the same way. So that tells you a lot. It tells you that there are certain things that you have to do to prepare for a game, but they have to be things that fit with your own personality and your own way of learning. And so you've asked me sort of, why do I do everything on a small sheet of paper? It goes back to my younger days. And you have to remember, when I was starting in Aberdeen, my commentary position was at the back of the stand with no elbow room at all. I had this little cramped position, and I had to have everything on one sheet of paper. And also, I was a languages student at that time, and I learned languages essentially by taking sheets of paper, folding them in half, putting the English word on the left-hand side and the German or the French word on the right-hand side, and then covering up one half of the paper and then testing myself. So I sort of came up with a similar system for my football commentary preparation. Now, in those days, the preparation wasn't what it is now, because we didn't have internet, we didn't have all the sources that we have now, but you still had to prepare. So that was how I would sort of do my own learning test, was to write things down. I realized from my languages studies that if you write things down, there is more chance that they will be implanted in your brain than if you do it randomly and start reading but don't actually write down in an organized way. So my sheets, I like to call them sort of organized chaos. If you were to look at them, they are all color-coded. So if I were doing, say, Manchester United against Everton, Manchester United would be in red, Everton would be in blue, and United would be on the left-hand side if they were the home team, Everton on the right as the away team in blue. And I just start scribbling. When I get the assignment, I just start writing things down, news items, stories. I go back to my previous notes from the time when I most recently will have called games involving those teams. And on we go from there. Now, younger commentators like to do everything online. I do some things online, but I really am old-fashioned about handwriting everything, because I do feel that through this handwriting process, things stick in the brain more readily.
My goodness. Yeah, definitely. I think the commentary trends have changed, especially with the evolving world. And You did mention a little bit about German. You do speak a very fluent German, is what I hear, and you've been covering plenty of leagues. I mean, you've covered the Dutch league, you've covered the Bundesliga, and you've covered leagues across the globe, various leagues, MLS, of course. So, which one did you find the most challenging, like in terms of uh, in any terms, like which one did you find the most challenging?
I think the one that was hardest for me to learn, and it was actually one of the earliest ones I did at ESPN back in the 90s, was the Brazilian football setup. And I say that because the Brazilian way of organizing football is quite different in comparison with what I was used to in Europe. And I'll be honest, I didn't know the histories of Flamengo, of Fluminense, of Botafogo, great names, but it involved a lot of research for me to get started with that. And so when you're starting with a blank sheet of paper, then that's when you really have to imbibe and really enjoy the studying process. Once I got into it, I thoroughly, loved my work with Brazilian football, lasted a few years in the 90s. And that's what I've enjoyed. You mentioned some of those leagues. I've been very lucky to have little phases of my life when I've worked on particular leagues. Most people are not like that. They tend to concentrate on one league and maybe for life. And in most cases, it would be, if you're English, it would be the Premier League in England. Most of my colleagues, that's what they have done, is English football. They might have dabbled in other football, but there's been that sort of common theme of English football. My career has been a bit different because I've lived in a few different places. I've worked for a few different broadcasters, and my work has changed according to rights acquisitions. So when I began with ESPN, it was the Dutch League and the Brazilian League. Prior to that, of course, it was Scottish football because I'm a Scot and I was working in Scotland. After the Dutch and the Brazilian League, the Champions League came along, and that became my bread and butter for more than a decade. Scottish football, we got that back at ESPN, so I was able to revisit that, and then eventually went back to live in the UK for almost a decade until not all that long ago, covering Scottish football and English football. The Spanish League for a while, the Italian League for a while, the Bundesliga in more recent years, which is my great love because I obviously have a German languages background. I've spent a lot of time in Germany, but only in more recent years has that sort of become my main focus. And I would say it is my main focus nowadays. But what I will say to you is that I think it's been a huge advantage to me and to my career, having all these different aspects of football within that career, because it means when a World Cup or a European Championship comes along, I'm not starting with a blank sheet of paper on any of it. And, I think if you do immerse yourself in just one league all the time, it is a bigger challenge, a bigger research challenge when the World Cup, for example, comes around, because you're not necessarily following all these other leagues. So, yeah, I'm always grateful that I've had the chance to work in so many different environments and to cover as many different football leagues.
Yeah, talking about different environments, the current environment that we live in, it's sort of like we don't have a scope to make a mistake. And if a commentator says just picks up one wrong person inside there's a corner, one wrong name is being called, the Twitter media, they let people know that this person has called out the wrong name. It's sort of like there is no room to make mistakes. And according to you, what is a bad day for a commentator? I'm sure you must have had your share of it over the years, and obviously you've had some amazing days over the years as well. But what, according to you, is an off day, and what are your any of these memories?
Well, we commentators are our own biggest critics. I think that is one thing you would find if you talk to every commentator. And even though we try to tell ourselves that we are talking live, and, I say to anybody, try talking live, unscripted for 90 minutes, and try getting everything to be word perfect during that 90-minute period. It's impossible. So we set this goal of perfection for ourselves, but we know realistically we can't live up to that. We're always going to be disappointed about something. And I would say that about every game. When I get off the air and put the microphone down, the first thing, and I wish I could change, but the first thing I do is think, oh, did I say that right? Did I get that right? You sort of start doubting yourself a little bit. With age and experience, maybe less so, you sort of, brush that to one side. But when I was a younger commentator, I was always fretting over this or that, or the wrong thing said here, or maybe it wasn't the wrong thing, but you sort of begin to wonder if you did get it right at the time. What I would say about social media is it is merciless, and anything that you say is picked up on. But again, you have to try to forget about that. Think about it like a footballer or like a referee. They will make a mistake in every game as well. Show me the footballer who has not made a mistake in a game. They make those same mistakes. And I've spoken to footballers and referees about this, and they say that is part of the sort of the mental process of moving on. You have to move on, and you have to realize that if you've been asked to commentate on a certain game at maybe a fairly high level, there's a reason why you've been asked to commentate on that game. It's because somebody has belief in you. And we are human. We're not robots. We are going to make mistakes from time to time. But I won't lie to you. If I make a mistake, even a minor one, then I will often have a sleepless night, or maybe not a sleepless night, but a night of fitful sleep, let's just say. I'll give you an example. The last World Cup in Russia, I really enjoyed my experience at the World Cup. I thought the broadcast went well, and we will always, as commentators, admit when they went well and when they went not so well. But the last game I did there was the quarter-final match between England and Sweden. And this shows you just how things can happen in a broadcast that people at home, don't necessarily understand. But we were going to break at halftime, and England had taken the lead through Harry Maguire. I had called the goal. We'd spoken a lot about Harry Maguire, and I knew that the world feed director was going to give me a shot of Harry Maguire going to break. Now, we didn't have great communication with our headquarters in Moscow at that World Cup. It was a bit of a crackly line, and I also had a producer next to me who was overriding that by giving me a count. Now, again, if you're at home, you think everything is super smooth, but it's not necessarily what's happening in your ears. And so I get the shot of Harry Maguire, and all of a sudden, my local producer next to me comes on the line and cuts out what's happening in Moscow, and cuts out my sound of myself, so I can't hear myself anymore. All I hear is this, go to break in 5, 4, 3. So I've got the shot of Harry Maguire. Now, it's kind of unusual for Harry Maguire to be the person we're talking about. The English player who we were talking mostly about at that World Cup was Harry Kane. So you're probably going to guess what comes up next. So all of a sudden, I've got this stuff in my ear. I'm suddenly being told to go to break in 5 seconds, and not being able to hear very much. I go, so there we have it. England with the advantage here. The goal by Harry Kane back. So I go to break, not even realizing I've said Harry Kane because there's all this commotion going on in my headset. And then I get a text from somebody about 2 minutes later saying, oh, you just said Harry Kane scored the goal. I had no idea I'd even said that. But then, of course, after the game, my Twitter feed explodes with people saying, you shouldn't be commentating. You didn't even know that Harry Maguire's got. I'm saying, well, hang on. If you'd listened to me calling the goal earlier, I said it was Harry Maguire. I think I know what Harry Maguire looks like, but I made a little mistake because I had some things going on in my headset. People don't care, People don't care. They just think, oh, you made a mistake. You are this, that, and the next thing. And that's why I always try to be sympathetic to referees and to footballers who occasionally will do something in a game that you think, how on earth did he do that? But you are not in the position of knowing what is going on with that player, what else they are thinking about. What are the other challenges? The referee, was he looking in the right direction? What was happening in his ear at that time? Because they're all wired for sound. So hopefully that provides some explanation. We don't make a habit of it. And, the very best commentators don't make a habit of it. But once in a while, we are going to make a mistake.
Indeed. I mean, this is a merciless world right now that we are living in. You do years and years of good work, and one bad flip of a moment, and then it's sort of like all the years of good work kind of it's tabbed to the other side.
And I always say to people, just think about your own day at work. Any day. Did you have an absolutely flawless day? Was there one thing in your work day that maybe at the end of the day you thought, oh, I got that wrong. I didn't do that very well. If we're honest, that is all of us. So again, we prepare so that we don't make mistakes. The goal is that we don't make mistakes. But the truth of the matter is, every commentator, if he or she is being honest, will tell you that there are things that they're not happy with at the end of every game because we are our own harshest critics.
Indeed. And over the years, I mean, I don't know who are those people who must have said, but I've really enjoyed your commentary. I'm just keeping it out there. So,
this is
the next question is, one thing that I only ask to majorly to journalists or commentators like you, because you are the people who can actually put it in the right words. So it's like especially in recent months, we've seen sports persons taking stand for all social causes, for different social causes. And again, the social media world, the keyboard warriors are out there. They're giving out their opinions. Sports persons shouldn't be doing this. Sports persons should be like, keeping themselves down to the sport. I'll just give you a small example of mine. I'm sort of a very calm personality, and over the years, I've seen a person named Mahendra Singh Dhoni, our Indian cricket team captain. He's a very calm person, and I've been a big fan of him. And it's sort of that personality sort of rubbed off on me, and that's how I'm sure people who've seen Roy Keane over the years must have his personality must have rubbed off on them, and so on and so forth. Do you think a sports person should be standing up for social causes? And I personally believe they should be, and to what extent they should be doing so?
I think it's very important that sports personalities are not seen as one-dimensional people, because nobody out there is a one-dimensional person. We are all multifaceted, and we all have gone through different things in our lives. And I couldn't agree more with what you've said. I mean, I don't believe in this idea that because, we're talking just about a sport, that's all that we should restrict our chatter to. Okay, there's a time and a place, and, you don't want to beat people over the head with anything, whether it's stats in a game. Moderation is the key. But I'm a big believer. If you're asking me about what's been happening, for example, here in the USA with athletes in US sports in the last few days,
Yes.
I have to say I think it's wonderful what the athletes have done. And I think it is a good example. And I think you will hear people around the world talking about it and nodding their head and saying, yeah, it's probably high time. It's probably long overdue. And, they are not doing this because they've pulled some sort of, cause out of their back pocket that was hidden away. They're doing it because of current events and because of what is happening and what they perceive to be happening in their community in this country. So, stick to sports. I hear it myself. Stick to sports. I follow you just to get your thoughts on football. Well, okay, the fact of the matter is, if I'm tweeting on social media, on Twitter, 98% of it is going to be about football, is going to be about football stories and opinions. That's what I do. But, give me credit for the fact that maybe there's the other part of my life that's not about football, and perhaps that can be interesting too. And I read about other people tweeting about their lives and their interests and their passions and their beliefs. And I think we are, if I can say it, I think we are at a very important stage in world history at the moment, in world politics. And I think anybody who just sort of thinks they can shove that off and sport is some sort of escape from the day-to-day of that is being naive. And politics and sport have always been intermingled. I mean, as long as I can remember, going back, for example, to the Moscow Olympics, and people said, oh, you shouldn't mix sport and politics. Well, people did back then, and they're going to continue to do it. And especially if politics have an effect on somebody's life as an athlete, but as a human being. So that's where I come from on this. I think that we should all be socially aware. I don't see sport as this sort of bread and circus thing that is there to entertain the masses and make them forget about all other problems. I think it is linked inextricably with the rest of the world and the rest of our lives. It's why, for example, when the Bundesliga came back, the teams began by applauding as a way of remembering victims of the pandemic. So you can't sort of say, yeah, we'll just have football come back and we'll forget all about the pandemic, and we won't do anything to put that into context, even though it's the biggest story perhaps of our lives, certainly for many of us. So that's my thinking on the whole subject.
Indeed, that's really a great take. I think a lot of our viewers would be enlightened with this. And from that serious discussion to a slightly more memorable ones, will not keep you for long. I think this is perhaps the last question that I have in mind. So you have commentated on so many World Cup games, so many Champions League finals, especially from that phase from 2003 to 9, if I'm not wrong, where you were with ESPN, and once ESPN lost the rights again, you were off Champions League for some time. So many, and that phase included some iconic Champions League finals and so many other World Cup games over the years. So if I were to ask you, if I were to put you on spot and ask you the three best moments of your career as a commentator, what would those memories be or games be?
Can I pick any game from any competition?
Absolutely any. Absolutely any.
Okay, I'll give you in sort of reverse order, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
So number 3, I'm going to give you, and again, this might not be such a resonant thing for a world audience, but it sort of sums up me, and so I want this to be quite personal. So when I was working, when I went back to work in Scotland, we had rights to a number of games on first ESPN and then BT Sport. And a few years ago, the Edinburgh derby between Hearts and Hibernian was a particularly important one because Heart and Midlothian, Hearts, were about to be relegated. We knew they were going to be relegated. They'd been in financial trouble, but it looked as though they were about to be relegated by their city rivals, Hibernian. And that was the game I was covering. And Hearts needed to win this game just to stave off relegation that day. They knew they were probably still going down. So they ended up winning the game 2-0. And the commentary that day just flowed. And Hearts fans to this day still tell me that the commentary that I was fortunate enough to be in position to provide still gives them goosebumps. And when people tell you that, then you sort of really take it to heart, to excuse the bad pun on Heart of Midlothian. But my line that day was, not on this patch of Edinburgh land, not in a derby, no relegation today. And people still play that one back to me. I think some people told me they have it on their phones as their ringtone, which is the ultimate flattery. But that was very special. And Hibs, their rivals, actually ended up getting relegated with them later that season. So the ultimate irony. So that's my sort of local one, number 3. Number 2, I'm only going to go back for this one 3 years, 2017. I was at the Signal Iduna Park in Dortmund for the derby between Borussia Dortmund and Schalke, which is my favorite derby in the world. And Dortmund led 4-0 at halftime.
Yes.
And we all thought this might be a record win for a Revier derby. Schalke had the wherewithal to come back and get a 4-4 draw with Naldo, their Brazilian centre-back, scoring right at the death to make it 4-4. And I always sort of think, you know, again, as commentators, we have to be lucky to be in certain situations. I was so lucky that day because I got one of the best stories of all time in German football, a 4-4 draw in the biggest derby, die Mutter aller Derbys, they say, the mother of all derbies in Germany. And that one will stand the test of time. And there does seem to be a thing about comebacks from a big score, because my number 1 would be, and you mentioned the Champions League era with ESPN,
I think
2005. I think you know as well, Istanbul, Milan, Liverpool. Again, Milan 3-0 up at half-time. Seemingly no way back for Liverpool, but they produced that comeback that we still talk about in such glowing terms. 3-3, extra time, not much happened there, but then the penalty shootout. Liverpool prevailed. And again, I was actually listening to that commentary back recently for a different project. Somebody wanted to talk to me about the game, so I went and watched and listened to it back. And I'm so very proud of that work. Not that you could really, I'm not going to say that you couldn't fail as a commentator, but it's harder to fail when you have that drama in front of you. And I'm just immensely privileged that I have my own voice on that game, and it'll be there for eternity. So the game itself was just a masterpiece of emotional theatre, really. And as commentators, we can't top that. And I've often said to younger commentators, if we get a final like that again in my lifetime, then I'll be quite surprised. So, yeah, 2005, Milan against Liverpool. Goodness me, I don't think we'll beat it.
Indeed. You know, Derek, when we talk to people like you, we can learn so much. There are so many lovely anecdotes that come from you, and you explain it so well. We've actually gone past the 40-minute mark. We're sorry to keep you for this long, but,
no problem. No problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. This was such a brilliant, brilliant conversation. We've loved listening to you over the years. We would love to keep listening to you in the years to come. Thank you so much for joining. It was really, really a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and all the best to you and everyone else in India during this pandemic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.